Say a name with me, just once, out loud if you can. Nelson Mandela. Now, I want you to reach back into your memory and answer me something. When did he die? Because a lot of people, and I mean a lot, will tell you without hesitation that Nelson Mandela died in prison in the 1980s. They'll tell you they remember the news coverage, the mourning, the unrest that followed. Some of them even remember watching his widow give a speech at the funeral. Except none of that happened. Nelson Mandela walked out of prison in 1990. He became the president of South Africa, and he lived until December of 2013. An old man, surrounded by his family, more than 2 decades after the funeral so many people swear they watched. So how do you explain that? Thousands of strangers, people who've never met, never spoke, spread across different cities, different countries, different continents, all carrying the exact same wrong memory, the same false funeral, the same grief for a man who didn't die. To be honest, when I first heard of this, I laughed it off. People misremember things. That's not a mystery. That's just being human. But then I started pulling the thread, and the thread didn't stop. Because it wasn't just Mandela. It was a children's book series that half the planet spells wrong. A movie that doesn't exist, that everybody's somehow seen. A line from one of the most famous films ever made that was never actually in the film. A logo that seems to have changed while nobody was looking. And here's the part I still can't comprehend. A lot of these people don't think their memory is broken. They think reality is.
Every story leaves a trace. A missing file. A witness who changes their statement. A symbol repeated too many times to be coincidence. And somewhere in that noise, there's a pattern. Welcome to the Tin Foil Diaries. If you see the world through rose-colored glasses, if it makes you happy, keep them on. But this is a serious look into conspiracies, cover-ups, fringe mysteries, and the things we were told to laugh off before we were told to fear them. Each entry is traced by the host, the voice at the end of the wire, sorting fact from rumor, theory from evidence, and signal from static. Because the truth rarely arrives clean. It flickers. It distorts. It hides in plain sight. Let's follow the signal. The signal.
Welcome back to the Tin Foil Diaries, where we don't ask what you remembered, we ask who else remembers it with you. I'm your host, and tonight's entry is called When Memory Turns on Us, the Mandela Effect. Tonight we're not going to a place. There's no ranch, no bunker, no field of antennas out in the cold. Tonight we're going somewhere stranger than any of that. We're going inside your own head, into that quiet little room where you keep things you're sure about, the facts you'd bet money on, the memories you'd swear an oath over. And we're going to find out that some of them might be lies. Lies you never told yourself, lies that just showed up. We'll walk through where this whole thing started and the woman who accidentally gave it a name. We'll go through the famous examples, the ones that make people's skin crawl a little. We'll look at what science actually says about human memory, because the science here is genuinely fascinating and honestly a little disturbing. And then we'll get to the theory that refuses to stay in its box, the one about parallel universes and shifting timelines, and the idea that we might have slipped out of one reality and into another without ever feeling the floor move under our feet. Because here's what makes the Mandela Effect different from almost everything else we've covered on this show. You don't need a leaked document. You don't need a whistleblower. You don't need some grainy photo or a redacted file. You just need your own memory and that cold little suspicion that it might not entirely belong to you anymore. Let's pull the thread. Let's start with the woman who accidentally named all of this. Her name is Fiona Broome. She's a self-described paranormal researcher, and back around 2009, she was at a conference talking with a group of people when she noticed something odd. She was certain, absolutely certain, that Nelson Mandela had died in prison back in the 1980s. And when she said it out loud, other people in the room nodded along. They remembered it too. The same decade, the same prison, the same sorrow. Total strangers sharing a detailed memory of an event that never occurred. Broome couldn't let it go, so she built a website around it. And that's where the name came from, the Mandela Effect. A label for that strange moment when large groups of people remember the same thing the same wrong way. Now, at first, this sounds like a party trick, a quirk, a funny little glitch. But then people started collecting more examples, and the list got long and weird, and above all, weirdly consistent. Here's the one that gets almost everybody, the children's books. A whole generation of adults, people who read these books as kids, then read them to their own kids, will tell you the beloved family of cartoon bears was spelled Berenstein, with an E-I-N at the end, like a person's surname. Except it wasn't. It never was. It's spelled Berenstain, Berenstain, named after the authors who created them, Stan and Jan Berenstain. And I know exactly how that sounds. You spelled it wrong as a kid, so did everyone you know. Maybe. But go ask 10 people over the age of 30 how it's spelled. Then show them the actual cover. Watch their faces. That flicker, that little stumble. That's the Mandela Effect in the wild. Then there's the Monopoly man. Rich Uncle Pennybags. Tall hat, tuxedo, big mustache. Ask people to picture him, and most of them will describe a monocle, that little circle of glass perched over one eye. He never had one. There's no monocle. There never was. But the memory is so vivid and so specific that when people find out the truth, some of them get genuinely upset. Not embarrassed, upset. Like something was quietly taken from them and they only just noticed. And that reaction right there, that's the thing that turns a trivia quiz into a conspiracy. Now, here's where things start to go a little sideways, shall we say. Because there are really two ways to explain all of this. And the boring way, the memory science way, we'll get to it and it holds up. But it doesn't scratch the itch. It doesn't explain why the wrong memories are so specific and so widely shared and so emotionally sticky. So a different explanation grew up in the dark corners of the internet, and it goes like this. What if the memories aren't wrong at all? What if it's reality that changed underneath them? The theory borrows its language from physics, from something called the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics. The pop culture version of that idea says that every moment splits into countless parallel universes, each one slightly different. Different outcomes, different histories, different spellings on the cover of a children's book. And the Mandela Effect crowd takes that idea and runs somewhere the physicists never intended. They say, what if we're not staying put in one universe? What if we're sliding quietly, constantly, without ever noticing, between timelines that are almost identical, but not quite? In one timeline, Mandela died in prison. In this one, he didn't. And a whole crowd of people just carried that old memory across the gap with them. Some people blame a specific piece of technology. There's a famous physics experiment buried underground near the border of Switzerland and France, the Large Hadron Collider, run by the organization called CERN. It's the biggest particle accelerator on Earth. It smashes particles together at nearly the speed of light so scientists can study the tiniest building blocks of matter. Real science. Serious, Nobel Prize-winning science. But in Mandela Effect lore, CERN did something else. The theory claims that when they switched that machine on, when they started punching holes in the fabric of matter itself, they cracked something they weren't supposed to crack. And they nudged the whole planet one step sideways into a neighboring reality. And the changed spelling of a children's book? That's just the fingerprint left behind. The seam where two realities got stitched together a little too clumsily. I'm not saying that proves anything, because CERN scientists will tell you, correctly, that a particle collider cannot rewrite your childhood memories. The energy it produces, while enormous on the scale of a single particle, is laughably tiny compared to, say, a bolt of lightning, or a cosmic ray hitting the atmosphere. But here's the thing about this theory. It doesn't actually need CERN to be guilty. It just needs CERN to feel spooky. And it does. A giant, secretive machine buried deep underground, smashing a reality apart just to see what falls out. That's not a laboratory in the public imagination. That's a temple. And people have always been afraid of what priests are doing behind closed doors. Now, let's pump the brakes on this ride down memory lane for a moment. Because the real science here isn't a letdown. If anything, it's more unsettling than the parallel universe stuff. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Your memory is not a recording. It is not a video file sitting neatly in some folder in your skull, waiting to play back exactly the way it happened. Memory is reconstruction. Every single time you remember something, your brain rebuilds it. From fragments, from expectations, from the general gist of what probably happened. And every time you rebuild it, you change it. Just a little. And then you file that changed version back away. And the next time you remember it, you rebuild that version. So the memory you trust the most, the one you've replayed 100 times over the years, might actually be the most heavily edited one you own. Psychologists have names for the machinery behind all of this. There's confabulation, where the brain quietly fills in the gaps with plausible, invented details and then hands them to you as if they're real. There's something called a schema, where your brain stores the general shape of a thing rather than the exact details. So a wealthy cartoon businessman from the early 1900s should have a monocle, according to that mental template. And your brain just helpfully adds one in. Then there's the social part, and this is the piece the conspiracy version conveniently leaves out. Memories are contagious. There's a well-documented effect where simply hearing someone else describe a false memory can plant that same memory in your own head. A researcher named Elizabeth Loftus spent decades proving that you can implant entirely fake memories in people using nothing but suggestion. Whole childhood events that never happened, like being lost in a shopping mall as a kid, planted successfully with just a few leading questions. So now picture the internet. Thousands of people all reading the same wrong spelling, all staring at the same fake movie poster, all nodding along to the same wrong memory at the same time. That's not a party trick anymore. That's a factory. A shared false memory factory running at a global scale 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And there's one more piece. Something researchers have started calling the visual Mandela Effect. Studies found that certain specific images, a famous cartoon character, a well-known logo, produce the same specific wrong memory in a huge number of people who have never met each other. The same error, the same false detail, over and over. And honestly, that's the part of all this I just can't get quite past, because it suggests the errors aren't random. They're structured. Something about the way human brains process those particular images is nudging all of us collectively toward the exact same mistake, which, if you sit with it, is a stranger idea than parallel universes, because it means the glitch isn't really out there in reality at all. The glitch is in the design of human memory itself. We're all quietly running the same faulty software, and we didn't write a line of it. Now, just when you thought it couldn't get any more interesting, the Mandela Effect says, "Hold my beer," because most Mandela Effect examples are small. A letter in a name, a logo, a monocle, little things easy enough to wave away. But then there's Shazaam. Ask certain people about a movie from the 1990s called Shazaam, starring the comedian Sinbad as a genie. And they don't just vaguely recall it. They describe it. The plot, the costume, specific jokes, the kids who rented it from the video store, the exact look of the box art on the shelf. Two children who stumble onto a genie and he has to grant their wishes. There's no such movie. It does not exist. It never existed. Sinbad himself said so, plainly and publicly. He's a real comedian, alive and well, telling people directly, "I never made that film." And here's the unbelievable part. People argue with him. They tell the man that he's wrong about his own career. Now, the skeptical explanation here is actually kind of beautiful. There was a movie about a genie in 1996. It was called Shazaam, and it starred the basketball player Shaquille O'Neal. Meanwhile, right around that same era, Sinbad hosted a movie marathon on television, dressed up in a genie-like outfit. So you've got Sinbad and you've got Shaq, a genie movie and a comedian dressed as a genie. 30 years of video store nostalgia blending it all together, one reconstruction at a time, with thousands of people online cross-contaminating each other's memories along the way. That's the debunk. And it's a good one. It probably is exactly what happened. But here's the part that changes how the story feels. Knowing the explanation doesn't dissolve the memory. People who remember Shazaam can hear the entire Kazam and Sinbad explanation, nod along, understand every word of it, and still feel deep in their gut that they watched that movie as a kid. The knowing doesn't touch the feeling. And that gap, the space between what you know and what you remember, that's the crack the whole conspiracy lives inside. Because if your certainty can be that vivid, that detailed, and that stubborn about a genie movie that never existed, then what else are you certain about? Let me give you a few more. Rapid fire. Just sit with them. The line from the famous space saga, the masked villain, the big reveal. Almost everyone remembers him saying, "Luke, I am your father." It's one of the most quoted lines in film history. The actual line is, "No, I am your father." There's no Luke in it. Go and check. It was never there. The fairy tale mirror. Everyone remembers the evil queen saying, "Mirror, mirror on the wall." In the actual film, she says, "Magic mirror on the wall." The underwear company logo. A lot of people swear there used to be a cornucopia behind the fruit, a horn of plenty. The company says there was never any cornucopia, not once. And here's what the conspiracy crowd points to. Notice that none of these are obscure. These aren't dusty little details nobody cares about. These are the load-bearing memories of an entire culture, the most quoted movie line, the most famous fairy tale, logos we've all seen 10,000 times. If our memories were just randomly decaying over the years, then the errors should be random too. Scattered, personal, different for everybody. But they're not. They cluster. Millions of people wrong in the exact same way about the memories we've reinforced the most. The believer looks at that and says, that's not decay, that's editing. That's evidence that the record itself got changed and our memories are the only surviving copy of the way things used to be. The scientist looks at the same thing and says, no, the most famous lines are precisely the lines that get misquoted, parodied, and repeated wrong the most often by other people. So of course the errors cluster. Fame is the cause of the mistake, not the mystery behind it. And here's the frustrating part. Both of these explanations fit the evidence. That's exactly why this thing never dies. The facts don't decide it for you. You decide it, based on how much you trust the ground under your own feet. So why does the Mandela Effect grip people the way it does? Why do smart, careful, skeptical people find themselves quietly whispering, "But I really do remember it"? Because it offers something almost tender, hiding inside something genuinely terrifying. Think about what the scientific explanation actually asks you to accept. It asks you to admit that your own mind lies to you, that the memory you're proudest of might be counterfeit, that you can be completely, confidently, emotionally certain about something and still be flat out wrong, that your sense of your own past is negotiable. That's a horrible thing to sit with, because if your memory can't be trusted, then who exactly are you? You're a story you tell yourself about yourself. And you might just be an unreliable narrator of your own life. The parallel universe theory, strangely enough, is a comforting one. It says, you're not broken. You remembered it correctly. It was reality that moved, not you. Your memory is a perfect record of a world that simply doesn't exist anymore. That's not a flaw in you. That's proof you were paying close attention. You see what that does? It takes a wound, my own mind betrayed me, and turns it into a badge. I'm a witness to a vanished timeline. And there's something even older sitting underneath all of it. The fear that the world isn't solid, that the ground could shift without warning. Every culture on Earth has some version of this story. The veil, the dream, the quiet sense that what we call reality is thinner than it looks. The Mandela Effect is just that ancient dread wearing modern clothes, spelling bees instead of spirits, corporate logos instead of omens in the sky. And the internet turned it into something like a religion with no God at the center. Just a congregation of people all turning to each other in the dark and saying, "You remember it too, right? Please tell me you remember it too." Because that's the real need underneath every bit of this. Not the truth about a genie movie, not the correct spelling of a children's book. The need to not be alone inside your own head. The need to hear a total stranger say back to you, "Yeah, I saw it that way too." That's not a conspiracy. That's just people standing in the dark, checking to see if anyone else is standing there with them. So where does all of this leave us with the final verdict? Let me separate it out for you. The fact is, large groups of people genuinely do share the same specific false memories. That part is real, documented, and studied. Mandela lived until 2013. It's spelled Berenstain. There is no monocle. There's no Luke in that movie line. And there was never a movie called Shazaam. Those are settled facts. It's also a fact that human memory is reconstructive, suggestible, and deeply social. Confabulation is real. Schema-driven errors are real. Implanted memories are real. Elizabeth Loftus proved that decades ago. And the visual Mandela Effect studies found that huge numbers of strangers make the same specific visual errors. All of that is solid science, and it explains the phenomenon without needing anything supernatural at all. Now, the speculation is that these false memories are so specific and so widely shared that ordinary psychology just can't account for them. This is where believers plant their flag. And honestly, the clustering is genuinely interesting. But interesting and not something I can personally explain are not the same thing as requires parallel universes. The conspiracy claim is that we're slipping between timelines, that CERN cracked reality open, that our memories are relics of erased worlds. There is no credible evidence for any of it. The physics don't support it. A particle collider cannot reach into your childhood and edit it. It's a beautiful story, just not a supported one. So here's my honest verdict. The Mandela Effect is real as a psychological phenomenon. In fact, it might be one of the best demonstrations we have of just how strange, how social, and how unreliable human memory actually is. The parallel universe explanation is almost certainly false, but it survives, and it'll keep surviving because it answers a fear that science simply can't soothe, the fear that we can't fully trust our own minds. The Mandela Effect didn't reveal a crack in reality. It revealed a crack in us, and that's the harder thing to look at. So tonight, before you fall asleep, try something for me. Picture a memory you'd bet your life on. Something certain. A face, a line, a logo, a moment, something you know for sure. And then just hold it there. Turn it over in your hands. Look closely at the edges of it. Because maybe it's exactly right. Probably it is. But there's a small, cold possibility that it isn't. That somewhere along the way, in the retelling, in the rebuilding, in the quiet nightly editing your brain does without ever asking your permission, something got changed, and you never felt the moment it happened. We spend our whole lives trusting the record, trusting that what we remember is what actually was. But the record lives inside a machine that rewrites itself every single time you open the file. So the next time you're sure, dead certain, about something small and strange, and someone tells you that you've got it wrong, don't ask whether the world changed. Ask why you needed it to. Good night.
That closes this entry of the Tin Foil Diaries. But the file doesn't end just because the tape stops. Follow or subscribe so the next signal finds you. And if this entry made you pause, question, or look twice at the story you were handed, leave a 5-star rating and a short review. That is how we slip past the algorithm and keep the transmission alive. Send this to one person who still notices the details everyone else ignores. And for the deeper dive, the timelines, theories, strange documents, in-depth articles, and lies, visit thetinfoildiaries.fyi. Until next time, keep your eyes open. Keep your doubts sharp. And never forget, the pattern is always louder in the static.
Is it your memory that's broken? Or is it reality?